Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you all very much for coming back to the Howard County Spending Field Advisory Committee. We actually pulled this meeting as an actual session to continue our discussion of the recommendations to include in the final report. I will start with a little bit of logistics, and then I'll hand it over to Steve Hunt. Steve pointed, our vice chair, as he mentioned in his email to all the committee over the week, and that he's not able to chair today's meeting as he's in driving to his work. So I'm very happy that Steve Hunt is able to help chair the recommendation discussion today. Just FYI, we pulled several voting members from the committee, and they're assisting in crafting the first draft to be brought back to the full committee for review and vote next week. During the process, it is discovered that one of the critical votes for the recommendation is not very clear. Not very certain what's the final decision based on the votes from the voting members there. So we want to make sure we confirm the final recommendation for that one. Also, after some of the members have further discussion, I just want to make sure share of the key recommendations and have more time to discuss with committee members before incorporating in that final report. So I would like to just very quickly refresh people's memory about the charge of the committee. So this is a committee established through executive order by county executive, and the committee is responsible for submitting a report by March 1st to the county executive with 4 categories of recommendation. Number 1 is the projection of general fund of revenues for the upcoming fiscal year, in this case, fiscal 23. So it's revenue projection. That's the number 1 recommendation. The second is the recommended level of new county GO bond authorization in FY23 capital budget. So the third recommendation is about the long-term revenue projections or the fiscal outlook. Then the 4th category is a little bit more open-ended. It's basically anything else the committee feels important or want to mention in the report that the committee feels might help the government in forming the policies or making decisions that has financial impact or fiscal impact. So this is just to refresh everybody's memory about the report itself and the mission of the committee. So to help everybody, I also list all the voting members. We currently have 15 voting members there. Todd Leckie, Dr. Clinch, Howie from Farm Bureau, Ellen Giles, Canada, John, Dr. Hassan, John Hendrickson, Cleveland, Steve Hunt, Dr. Irani, Barbara Leonardo, Steve Pointer, who's my vice chair, Hollis and myself, the committee chair, and Josh. So the committee is actually bigger than that. We also have members from different organizations, education entities, council, county executive side, branches, etc. But others are either representative or organizations that directly impacted by some of the recommendations. They are non-voting members or advisors to this committee. So the final vote would need to come from this group. And another thing about the upcoming schedule is after today's meeting, the small team pool will continue to work on the report itself. And it's our plan to bring it back to the full committee for vote on February 24th, 7 p.m. That will be a night meeting, again, virtual. But before that, we will provide the report back, preliminary draft report back to the group at least 2 days in advance. So with that, I will hand it over to Steve Hunt. And by the way, Steve, you can introduce yourself, but I just want to let the group know that I'm very happy that Steve is able to come back. He was with the committee for many years under different administrations there. And when he was not able to make it, then we're very happy he's coming back. And he has a lot of knowledge on the committee, its own charge. So thank you so much, Steve, for agreeing to share the discussion today.
Thank you, Holly. If anybody can't hear me, just put it in the chat and I'll play around with my computer. I think everything looks like it's on. So good morning, everybody. As Holly said, I'm Steve Hunt. I have been a member of the committee for many years. I like to say I got a 2-year sabbatical from the committee the last 2 years, but now I'm back. I guess it's kind of like the mafia. You know, you try to get out, but they drag you back in. So anyway, glad to be back. I won't get into any intros about myself because I'll save you guys the time on that. But anyway, glad to be here. You can just call me the other Steve. So I'll be chairing this morning's meeting. And just before we get into the context for the report, just a couple of quick notes on top of what Holly just said here in terms of why we called this meeting. She did mention that at the meeting where we took votes, we didn't feel like we captured a sufficient number of the voting members. So we wanted to make sure we did that. And I don't believe we got through all 4 categories either. So what we did as a writing subcommittee, we'll call it, is what you're going to see today is what we came up with, which is basically a framework of the report. So, this is not the final report in any way, shape, or form. It's more of a framework. A lot of discussion points that we threw out as a group, and we wanted to bring this back to the full committee for discussion, dialogue, etc. And then obviously we'll go back through and we'll take the votes. And just as a matter of housekeeping, our plan is I will poll the individual voting members one by one, and we'll just record those votes so that we have that for the record when we present to the county executive, county council, if that question does come up. So, and the other thing to note here is as we go through the different elements for the different voting matters, we'll call them, while I will be polling the voting members, we will also have a discussion before the votes, and everybody is welcome. This is why we have folks from different entities to provide, your insight, your analysis, your experiences, basically those things that will give us information and will drive where we go with certain things, because you all are on the ground. That's why you're here, and we certainly appreciate your presence. So anyway, that's really going to be the process for this morning, and Holly laid out the rest of the schedule. So if there are any questions on that, let us know. So the context for the report, and just a couple of things that we came up with, and a couple of folks threw out a lot of ideas, and we captured them in a couple of bullet points here. So, first and foremost, the SAAC has always recommended, being more prudent and conservative in the budgeting. Some have accused us in the past of lowballing, but that really is smart budget practice. Because you just never know what's going to happen, and you see some of the X factors, I'll call them, shifts in demographics. I don't know, Holly, if DPZ presented the demographics report. I might not have been there for that part, but we have been shifting in terms of our demographics for a number of years. Slowing growth trends. We're not growing as fast as we used to in, say, the 90s or the 2000s. Lessening developed, land that can be developed. I think the last number I saw, we were at 92, 93%. That doesn't include areas that are redeveloped, et cetera. But as far as new dirt, there's not a whole lot of it. And then obviously, the tepid national business cycle. I think Dr. Klitsch, captured that well as far as how business cycles work and how that can filter down from the national environment to here at the local level. Second bullet point, our economy was shaped by things outside of Howard County. The response of the federal government to COVID. We got a decent amount of money. In fact, the president, in his presentation to the National Association of County Governments, actually called out Howard County in terms of how we use money to provide bonuses to teachers and others involved in our educational system. So we actually got a shout out from the chief executive of the country. So that's kind of cool. Next slide, please. So additional context, again, talking about COVID, the federal government spent nearly $5 trillion to combat this pandemic, and a lot of it went down to the local level. And from a budgetary standpoint, it really was a boon to Howard County. I mean, we got a good chunk of money from the American Rescue Plan, and a lot of that was because of our connection to the federal government. I'm sure Leonardo, Larry can talk about how many companies we have here that are federal government contractors or subcontractors, et cetera, or employees. So Howard County, because of our location and proximity to federal government entities, we did very well there. And then, of course, it must be stressed that the COVID economy is not the real economy. This economy was pumped up by funding from the federal government. So that in combination with historically low interest rates, all indications are that is going to change as well. We call it the paper gains, balance sheets, 401ks, investment funds, et cetera. Howard County, if you look at us in terms of counties across the country, we're the 1%. I think we're top 10 right now. We used to be top 5. I don't know where we are right now, but if you look at counties across the country, we are the 1%. So we've done well in this county, overall. So obviously that's not going to last forever. So that's the context that we wanted to present to everybody in terms of, this report. This past fiscal year, the actuals are not in, but they're going to be very good because of this, funding from the federal government. So just want to open it to the floor just really quickly. If anybody has any questions, anything that maybe we didn't catch as far as the context, because we are going to, last 2 bullets. Thank you, Holly. Sorry about that. Anyway, so we are entering a renewed period of fiscal uncertainty. We were under that uncertainty for a number of years because we didn't know what the economy was going to do, and so now we're moving from hopefully pandemic to endemic, and who knows what that's going to look like in terms of how that affects the county and especially our tax base. You look at commercial tax base. I do corporate, real estate for my company, and we're struggling with that right now as far as how we're going to reposition our real estate portfolio based on how people are now working. So I live this every day on my job. So we are going into this new normal, whatever that might look like eventually. So again, the bottom line goal of this report is to ensure that we have stable footing, to make sure that whatever comes our way, this county is positioned to handle it. We're built to ride out the storms. We are set up in such a way that, if we have times like during the COVID pandemic where funding comes in unexpectedly, we can benefit from that. We can give bonuses to those who deserve it and need it. We can support our local businesses, but during bad times, we're also built to be able to provide, not only support for certain businesses and entities, but deliver services to our people. We don't have to go through radical cutbacks, and that is the goal of this committee, is to provide advice to the county executive, the county council, that allows us to be fiscally sustainable over the long haul. So I believe that's it, Holly, as far as the context. So I will now open up the floor to anybody who has any questions, comments on just the context of the report before we get into report considerations. Here's somebody trying to buzz. Nope.
Steve,
Yes.
we're going to put new motions on the table, correct?
Yes. Holly and I just wanted to present that context, kind of to give an overview of what we're trying to accomplish with this report. this will be that context will be part of the report, the message that we wanted to, or we want to send to the county executive, county council. So just wanted to give that context for folks as we're going through the various motions. So yes, we are absolutely getting into that right now if there are no questions or comments.
So when we have those motions, there could be a call for discussion, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. However, at this moment, I just, for the entire group, would like to share that I ended the last meeting having some concerns about process because I felt that I had actually put a motion on the floor for 65 million for the bond limit, and it had received a second, and I think it wasn't heard because we were asked to make a decision on our vote between 65 and 75. So it wasn't clear what was voting. And I actually, perhaps because of my technological deficits, wasn't able to find the polling thing because I was told to hunt for chat. So I was hunting for chat. But anyway, so I didn't actually even vote, but I was concerned just overall who voted and if we'd really had the fulsome discussion that I would have preferred, because I think that there wasn't enough context. So I just wanted to own that for the entire group that I'm one of the people that had some concerns. It wasn't kind of an amorphous sort of thing floating out there, but it was. But when I brought it to our small writing committee, it seemed that others had some concerns also. So that's all I want to say. Thank you.
No, thank you, Barb. And you're right. I mean, we were all in agreement. In fact, I think we, a couple of us mentioned like the fact that things felt rushed last time. We were trying to get a lot in a short period of time. And I know in speaking with Holly, it's certainly something that we're going to consider and as a takeaway before the next SAAC comes together, that we give time for that discussion. So that was a point very well taken, Barb, and much appreciated. And I think you're right. There was definitely agreement in the room, if not unanimous, near unanimous, that was the case. So, any other comments or questions before we press on? Okay, I'm not seeing anybody either via technology or jumping in. So let's proceed here. So the report considerations, and this is where we are going to get into discussion and then votes. So the first consideration, and Holly, posted these initially. There's 4 of them that we take. Well, there are 3 that we take votes on, and then the rest of it we just discussed through. So the first one is the general fund revenue forecast. And we changed the format here because as we were looking through, we usually say, okay, we're going to, do an increase of X over budget. And it really didn't, none of us felt like that spoke to reality because, there are actuals that you should compare it to, not to what you budget to, because as I noted earlier, what really happens during a fiscal year is subject to so many factors and X factors. So, one thing we propose is that we just put the flat number of what the revenue forecast is, and what the forecasts are indicating is that the revenue that will be a part of the general fund from a budgeting standpoint is $1.281 billion. That does exclude the use of any one-time funding that came through in the previous fiscal years. This amount, just to provide some context, is comparable to the actual revenues in fiscal year 21. Obviously, we don't have fiscal year 22 because we're still in the middle of the fiscal year. So if you look at that number, 1.286 was the actual revenue number from fiscal year 2021, and we're actually by a hair down in terms of revenue from the actuals in fiscal year 21. That number does represent a 6.6% growth year over year from a budget standpoint. So, that 1.281 is a 6.6% increase from what the budget number was for fiscal year 2022. But obviously, again, we don't know how that is going to compare to actuals. And a couple of points to make. That 6.6% number is it is unsustainable. This really is a one-time pot of money for the county. That's a good thing. Upward pressure is always better than downward pressure, but it is because of COVID funding. And if you think about across administrations, the Trump administration, the Biden administration, the fiscal year 21 number was affected by the funding put in place by the Trump administration in calendar year 2020. And then obviously this fiscal year was impacted by what the Biden administration did in calendar year 2021. So the 21 actuals and this 23 budget number are artificially high. And then in budgeting, one thing we wanted to put out there for consideration to the county executive was, and many of us, and not all of us, have been in business or in some organization we've had to do budgeting. And, you might say, we look like we're going to get $100 million in revenues, but we're going to budget based on 80, just to give ourselves a cushion. So, that's a note that we recommend putting out there for the county executive to not budget all the way to that revenue forecast, but exercise some caution because there are some uncertainties out there. Was there another slide for this one, Holly, or is that it for the revenues? Nope, that's it. Okay. So with that, I'll open the floor to discussion on this consideration. Okay.
So Steve,
yes.
I just want to make sure for this consideration, are you looking for, I guess, are you looking for a motion or just if there's any comments? I just want to be clear as to what you're looking for on the considerations.
Sure. Well, what I'll do first, Leonardo, is I will open the floor for discussion and then I will call for motions.
Okay.
So is there any discussion on this consideration? Okay. Is there a motion to vote on this consideration?
So moved, Richard Clench.
Okay.
Leonardo, second.
Okay, so Richard moved, Leonardo seconds. All right, so we will poll the voting members here. So if you just come off of speaker, or come off of mute, excuse me, when I call your name, and yay or nay on this one, and we'll proceed. So Mr. Atterburn.
Yes.
Ms. Boyd.
Yes.
Dr. Clinch.
Yes.
Let's see, Ms. Giles.
Yes.
Let's see, Mr. Hendrickson.
Yes.
I will vote yes myself. Dr. Arani. Thought he was on there. Yeah, Dr. Arani, are you there? I see you in the
Putting
participants.
thumbs up, I think he may have a problem.
Okay. All right.
Do another thumbs up to say if that was a yes. Yes, he votes yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Clinch, serving as proxy. Ms. Lawson.
Yes.
Mr. McClarty.
Yes, and I put the hand raised up as well. So
Thank you, sir. Dr. Sun.
Yes.
All right. Is there anybody I missed?
Miss me, Steve. Josh.
Josh.
Mr. Zucker, you're here. Good morning. Mr. Zucker.
Yes.
Did you call
Okay.
Cleveland Horton?
I do not have him here.
Oh, he's not here this morning.
Yeah,
Okay.
in participant list, I have Mr. Missing. I have Mr. Figi, Dr. Hassan, Mr. Horton, and our chair or Vice Chair Poignat.
Got it. Got it. Others are absent.
Yep. Yeah, I kind of scanned through the participant list and compared to what I had here. So, okay, let us move on to the next one. And this one is always the fun one here. So next slide, Dr. Sun, please. Okay, this next consideration, the fiscal year GO bond authorization recommendation, and this is actually a revote to Ms. Lawson's point. Thank you, Barb, again for that context, both Saturday and today. So, we had four numbers. It seemed like we had boiled things down to three numbers. So we have a number of 50 million, we have a number of 65 million, we have a number of 75 million. We'll talk about how we're going to go about the vote in a minute, but some points to make on that. Positively, we have done as a county a good job of, reducing authorization in terms of recent years to get in line with our recommendations. I go back to 2015, and I just remember the days where, even going back behind, before these numbers, where we'd recommend a number and the final authorization would be, tens of millions of dollars over our recommendation. So if you look at the last 4 years, you can see where it starts at 96.3, and then it goes down to 72.5, which is more in line with what we've done. And it really is, designed, our recommendation, keeps in mind where we are as far as debt burden and debt service, of course. So, the need here is, we really want to keep new debt under control. And as Holly presented, and Dr. Arani, I believe, discussed this as well, 3 of our 4 indicators continue to grow. However, the big one that's out there is debt service as a percentage of revenues. Our policy cap, has been 10%. We knew a couple of years ago, when we recommended approval of the courthouse, the new courthouse under the P3 funding. We knew we were going to go over the cap for a few years, but if we look at the long range projections, that number will go back down, and that was something that was explainable to our bond rating agencies, et cetera. But obviously, we want to make sure that we don't continue going upwards. We really do want that pressure to be going the other way. So those are the points to make. I think, Holly, those were do we have another slide talking about? Sorry, I did not have time to print this thing, so you'll have to forgive me for asking Dr. Sun this question. So, all right, so let's go back, Holly, please. So let's open the floor for discussion before we call for a vote on this one. So anybody have any questions, comments, concerns regarding this consideration?
This is Barbara again.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I was quite concerned, not only procedurally last time, but I didn't feel like that there had been a full conversation about context, which I think Steve and Holly have done a nice job of explaining, that we're kind of in a one-time situation with this revenue projection. And I would still prefer that we go with 65 million in our recommendation for bonds. And my reasoning for that is that, as Steve mentioned, traditionally the county has continued to go considerably above our recommendation, which they have every prerogative. I mean, we are just a citizens committee making recommendations as carefully as we can. However, with the interest environment that will, looking forward, will be going up, and the needs in the community, we've constantly counseled prudence, and I don't think we've been overly prudent. But last year we counseled 50 million, and the actuals, I think, were 72.5 million that the county approved. So for us to this year then go to 75 million above, seems to me it gives them license to go another 20 or 30 million above what we projected. It's not in keeping with what we've been trying to suggest for fiscal responsibility. The other point I'd make is that we have been talking the last few years, several of us have been going into the community, talking to different organizations, the Chamber, to the Downtown Partnership Board, the Association of Community Services, and talking about this need for fiscal responsibility and looking very strategically about what our priorities are, so that we can move from a growth county to one that needs to be more sustainable, with more of a flat income going forward because we don't have the growth propelling us. So I would encourage us, strongly encourage us to look more closely at those figures. And of course, I'm on record of saying that 65 million I think is generous in terms of where we might go. And you might recall that at least 3 times Steve Poynott, not Steve Hunt, recommended 0. So that is coming from a banker. And I think I'll end my conversation with that point. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Barb. Any other points to make here?
I would just, I guess, in many respects, echo Barbara's comments, and I think also just as someone, Steve, like yourself and Josh, that have been on the committee in previous years, I think we've also seen in some respects that we've given one number, and it hasn't been uncommon across administrations. So not necessarily talking about whether it was Dr. Ball, but even going back to, I think I first came on when County Executive Kittleman was the county executive. And so I say that again for context, that it hasn't been uncommon also for us to give a number and the administration go above that number. If I'm correct, and Holly, you can, correct me if I'm wrong. So I think going to a 65 in light of just some of the information that Barbara has mentioned, I think in many respects, again, allows us to be a little bit more conservative than perhaps what we may see in practice.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McClarty. Anybody else?
Yeah,
Mr.
this is
Zucker.
Josh here. I agree with Barbara and Leonardo, but I think 65 is a good balance just because it enables us to take advantage of the good times that we just had. We don't want to, we want to give some flexibility. We have a lot of needs in the county. We have needs outside of the school system that are great. We have needs within the school system that are great. And at the same time, we also have a long-term liability in that we have a underfunded rainy day fund. And we saw what happened to that at the end of the Ullman administration, coming out of a recession where we really did have to do mid-year rebudgeting that hurt expectations, hurt county workers, hurt our social safety net, and we have a chance to get that back up to a reasonable balance. So this is, I think, a 65 million is really, trying to repair the roof while the sun shines, and it's fairly prudent. So I'm going to agree with Barb and Leonardo.
Okay, thank you, Josh. Any other comments?
Steve, it's Ellen Flynn Giles.
Yes, Ms. Giles. Morning.
I'm just going to echo what everyone has said before, noting that the county's made great progress in looking at our capital investments also in line with their impact on operating expenses as we move forward and make sure that those things are balanced. And so I think it's prudent that we, fall somewhere in the middle of the ranges here that were put out. 65 seems reasonable. And does allow us to take some advantage from one-time money that lets us do something, but we also have to be reasonable in understanding what that means as we go forward. So I'm in favor of 65 million as well.
Okay, additional comments. And again, I remind you that comments are not restricted to voting members. So if you're a non-voting member and want to recommend a number, you can certainly do so. So just want to make sure that's clear that anybody can add to the discussion. Nope, no other comments. Yeah, my only final comment, and this is just my own comment since I'm a voting member, is for 75. And again, I think I mentioned this the last time when we did the original vote. If you look at the long-term projections, those projections as far as debt service as a percentage of revenue, I think we went, Holly, all the way out to 20, might not have been 2030, but it was, well out to the future. And that number, I believe, was based on if we just did 75 million going forward, what would that look like? And, it still allowed us to maintain our AAA bond rating. Our debt service number still went ultimately down below 10%. It did not make it get any worse. Yes, 65 million could accelerate that process, but I don't know. I'd be interested to see what that long term look like with the 65 as opposed to the 75. My thought is we have a lot of needs in this county, including capital needs and other needs. So if we can get away with it, that's why I immediately said, and I think we had to clear up the confusion on my comments. I was not recommending 80 because that was not a number that was factored in. So it looked like 75 was the max. So in my mind, if we could take care of some things and still be in line in terms of the measures that allow us to maintain our rating, do not negatively impact our debt service percentage, it still has that downward pressure. We should take care of the things that we could take care of. So that was my pitch for 75, and I'm sticking to it. So that's just my pitch as well. So Holly, were you trying to throw something out there?
Yes, Steve, since you're mentioning, are you trying to look at a few numbers here? This is the debt service projections there.
Yeah. Oh, okay, it's 2031. But if you look at that, and actually, if you look at the general assumptions, it looks like 90 million annual debt issuance at 4.5% interest plus 75 Whitfield loan. So if you look at this, the way I read this, and correct me if I'm wrong, Holly, 75 would still not kill us.
So based on this one, it's basically saying that based on the general assumption. By the way, the notes actually need to be corrected a little bit. The next 2 years, assumption next 2 years, 75, and the rest is $90 million in the model run by financier. Based on that, the debt services percentage of revenue which exceeded the policy cap of 10% 2 years ago and expected to be like that in the next 9 years. And the peak time will be close to 11.3% and then gradually come down. And after 8 or 9 years, it's going to be under 10%. So overall trend was anticipated a couple of years ago already, except it's now extend a little bit longer, stay above 10% because before the pandemic, actually a few years revenue growth has been slowing down and the debt burden continues to increase even at a much slower pace as everybody talk about. So I think the general thought is things are improving compared to the forecast about a year ago at this point, because revenue picture improved a little bit, but it's still above the policy for several years, 8 to 9 years, based on the current projection.
Hey, Holly.
Yeah.
And I don't want to drag this conversation on, but I'd be interested to find out why that massive spike as of June 30, 2024, because it looks like everything either up or down looks pretty. It doesn't look horrible, but that number out there is a big number because you go from 10.57 to 11.27 and then back down to 10.63.
It's just based on existing debt because they're outstanding debt. They have pay schedule there, so that compares to the new.
I guess is there something new that's driving that number up?
No, that's not based on any bump of new bond. It's just driven by the new bond, as we just talked about, is already factored in. But that's the existing bond. There's a retirement schedule. There's some years change more dramatically than other years.
Okay. Interesting. Like I said, I just see that number was striking to me that it's sitting out there. Like you said, it might just be we have a bunch of stuff out there and there's a good amount that gets retired in 2024, which throws the number back down. So I'm sorry, Barb, go ahead, please.
I guess, Steve, given the history of the county exceeding, am I still there? It looks like I've lost things. Oh, there we go.
You're still there. It's
Okay.
just Holly's adjusting the
Okay.
charts.
Given the past history of the county, they usually go at least 20 million over what we project. So would you be happy with 95 million?
Dear God, no.
Well, that if you look historically, if we threw the history back up for the last 10 years, I think I'm not wrong that it's about 20 million that they go at least. So last time we said 50, they went 72 and a half. The year before we went something like 70 million and it was 90 some million. So the history is such that we need to continue to counsel prudence and not let the leash get so much longer. I'm sorry, I feel pretty strongly on this one.
Okay. No, understood. Absolutely. Okay, Holly, let's go back to the main power slide deck. Sorry. All right. So here's what we're going to do, just to kind of keep this from turning into a votorama. I'm not going to call for, or we're not going to call for votes on every single number here. So hopefully this works out. What I'm going to do is throw it out to the floor for a motion for a number. Any number that is thrown out that gets seconded, we would then have a vote on if it's two numbers that get proposed and seconded, we'll just have a vote and you pick one of the two numbers or one of the three numbers, that sort of thing. So I said I didn't want to turn this into voting on every single number, only the numbers that actually get support in terms of motions and seconds. So hopefully everybody gets that. So yes, Ellen, you had a face.
I'll go ahead and move that we approve a bond authorization at 65 million.
Second.
All right, so we have a 65 from Ellen with a second from the not passionate enough by a mile Barb. All right, any other motions? All right, I'm going to motion 75. Do I have a second for 75?
Actually, wait a minute, Steve. If we have a motion on the, I'm sorry.
We
have to vote on the motion before we can move to a second motion.
Okay, actually, what I was going to do is I was going to put, if there are multiple numbers that have a motion and a second, I was going to call for a vote and you vote on one of those.
That's not how it works.
No,
Yeah.
I think though we could also do it that Steve, you would amend the motion that Barb made. And if somebody seconds your amendment and your amendment fails, then basically 65 is self-executing.
Okay.
As the one. I mean, we could do it that way too.
Okay. Yeah, I was just trying to keep from having 5 different votes. So, all right. So we have a motion at 65. We have a second at 65. I will propose an amended motion at 75. Do we have a second for the amended motion? All right. We do not. Does anybody have another number they would want to put out for consideration for an amended motion? Okay. With that in mind, 65 is the number, so we will call the vote here. My paper here. Mr. Atterburn.
Yes.
Ms. Boyd.
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Clinch.
Yes.
Ms. Giles.
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson.
Yes.
I am voting no. Dr. Irani.
Yes.
Ms. Lawson.
Yes.
Mr. McClarty. Dr. Sun.
Yes.
Mr. Zucker.
Yes.
Anybody that I missed on the previous votes that are now here? Mr. Figi, Dr. Hassan, let's see, Mr. Horton, Mr. Poignat. Okay. Vote carries at 65 million for the recommendation. Holly, please note. All right. So the final voting item is long-term fiscal outlook. Next slide, please, Holly. So fiscal outlook, we are recommending that we go with an outlook that it has a revenue growth projection of 3.3 to 3.4% average based on the preliminary multi-year projections. And a lot of numbers here, but you'll see where we are from now through fiscal year 28. You'll see that the budget number for fiscal year 22 was 1.2 billion. Fiscal year 23 projected, as we talked about before, 1.281. And the interesting number here is if you look in the out years, you see that big fat 6.6% out there. But then if you look at the out years, the number really is in the 3.4 range. That's actually an improvement. Years ago we were looking at it, I think we're in the 2s. So our outlook has improved from where we were a couple of years ago. But some important points here. And Dr. Clinch, stressed this to us a lot, was, you could go 2, maybe 3 years out. After that, you really are, throwing a lot of darts out there. It's nearly impossible to predict it because, Howard County, because of where our revenues are based upon, for example, income tax, property tax, that triennial assessment, who knows what happens there. So, there are so many factors that you have to look at going forward. You just don't know. It is a slight improvement, as we talked about, and that really is the strong housing market, and also the related assessment of properties for the state of Maryland and certainly here, and then obviously the stimulus impact. Uncertainties, obviously the pandemic, as again, hopefully we go endemic. Where does that go? What does the economic recovery look like? Like most experts would tell you, or people who look at these things, we've recovered quicker than we thought we would, but is that recovery sustainable? Who knows? The big I word out there, inflation. What impact does that have? Interest rates, the Fed has indicated that they're going to start, raising those rates. Do they? Don't they? By how much? You can almost connect the stock market to all of these other items here, of course. And then federal policies. We've got elections in 22. We have elections in 24. We have elections in 26. So, who knows what the makeup of Congress looks like? Obviously, who knows what the state legislature looks like? I mean, we have elections, so who knows what happens there? And then long-term concerns. I mean, do our demographics continue to trend the way they have been? Land constraints, residential development shifts. We've seen a lot of projects go from, multi-year family units. So basically, the recommendation here is to develop a multi-year expenditure plan at that projected growth number. Next slide, Holly, and then we'll go back, because I think there were some additional points to make here. Again, long-term fiscal outlook. Wow. Sorry, guys. Projected gap between revenue expenditures, it is significant. If you look at the projected, that 6.6 number as far as projected growth in revenues, just the recommendations we have as far as expenditures for various entities and agencies throughout the county is 2.4 times that. So, if the county's got, $1 coming in, we've got people asking for $2.40. So that is a problem. And that trend, if you look at some of the out year projections, it's going to continue. So final points here, county needs to look at long-term revenue expenditure drivers, really need to do a deep dive and a deep analysis to see how we can, right size things to where we can continue to deliver services within the, constraints of revenues coming in, and balancing different demands and services to make sure, again, we can ensure service delivery, but, within what we have to spend on those services. And then obviously expenditure needs and tax burden, because the big thing is, we don't want to tax ourselves into non-competitiveness to solve this problem. So that was it for this section. So Hal, if you go back to the previous slide, I'll open the floor for discussion before we take a vote on this consideration. So any comments, questions, concerns? Going once, going twice. Okay. So with that in mind, we will call for a vote. Motion to approve this consideration of a recommendation that we base on an out-year projection of 3.3 to 3.4%.
So moved.
Ellen moves. Do we have a second?
Second.
And we have Barb second. All right. All right. So let's call the team here. Mr. Atterburn,
Yes.
Ms. Boyd,
Yes.
Dr. Clinch,
Yes.
Ms. Giles,
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson.
Yes.
I vote yes. Dr. Ronnie,
Yes.
Ms. Lawson,
Yes.
Mr. McClarty,
Yes.
Dr. Sun.
Yes.
Okay, motion carries with this recommendation.
I think you have
And it-
Josh. You didn't.
Oh,
Josh
Mr. Zucker,
again.
sorry.
Yes. It would have carried without me anyway, so.
Well, there's that, but thanks, Josh. And again, just a reminder to the group voting and otherwise, we will have another vote when we have the draft document ready to go. So obviously there will be room for discussion. So if you think after the meeting, hey, there's a point that needed to be made there, there will certainly be another opportunity. So just to remind the room that this allows us to write the draft report, but we will obviously deliver the report to the group and we'll have another discussion and vote, et cetera. So obviously that'll just be one vote, but just let everybody know that there will be another opportunity if any thoughts come to your mind after the draft is done. So then we had the final section, which does not call for a vote here. These are just other report considerations. It's a section we always put for those who are new to the process or listening in into this document to the county executive, just other things to think about. So I'm going to go through the considerations that the subcommittee came up with as we were putting this framework together. And then anybody, voting member otherwise, if you have any thoughts on the considerations that we threw out there, or if you have thoughts in terms of new considerations, please let us know. If there are any typos, please forgive. We'll clean these up before we get to the draft document and certainly before the final document. So I'll try not to drag too deep into these. You obviously have it on your screen, so let us away. So other findings and recommendations in terms of operating budget. One recommendation, right off the top was to, a positive move to set aside 10% of funding to the rainy day fund. I believe that's what this is talking about here. So you have your 3% policy reserve plus 7% charter mandated fund. I don't know, Holly, you could probably tell us what the current number is, but I'm sorry, let me correct myself. So it's a positive move that we're at 10 and now we are looking to go to 15. Is that correct? Okay. What?
That's discussed last time at the full committee, because we reported that, and actually Rafael, our finance director,
Right.
in his presentation, when we talk about bond rating, we are one step forward towards more other AAA. We're not there yet, but we did set aside now 10%, and then the full committee last time discussed how about raise it to 15% as a goal. So that's what was last time's discussion.
So,
and Steve, it's also not to raise it to 15% in 1 year. It's to gradually raise it over time.
Yep.
Just make sure that that's stressed.
Yeah. So one thing here, Holly, and to the rest of the writing group, let's clean this up a little bit so that it's a little bit clearer. Because you're right, Holly. I'm just reading off the slide, but you're right. The discussion was we've made a positive move to get us to 10%, and our recommendation is to basically have the county develop a phase-in plan, if you will, to get us to 15%, which is in line with other AAA rated governments. And to use no more than half the annual surplus in the following fiscal year. So a little bit of cleanup there, but hopefully everybody gets the gist of that recommendation. we're at 10, which is good. Other AAA rated government agencies are at 15. And so to develop a multi-year plan to get us to that number. All right, so next consideration in terms of one-time funding, grants, et cetera, making sure that COVID grants and other one-time grants are used by the county for non-recurring expenditures, so that they basically don't get built into the budget and create an artificially high number going forward. Next slide, Holly. So next one is work with agencies to basically reduce requests and balance all the needs. Really this is about working with the agencies so that as they're developing their budgets, they really are keeping in mind and developing them within the context of the county having limited funds overall. Obviously, to continue, provide continued relief and assistance to impacted businesses. Again, talked about that earlier, supporting our local businesses and residents, supporting that business recovery. Supporting our nonprofits. We talked a lot about how our county stacks up and support the nonprofits versus other counties. So looking at a plan to better balance that out, especially if you're in times where the nonprofits are so overly reliant on personal contributions, et cetera, and when times are rough, that money's going to dry up. So how does the county support those entities that deliver so much in the way of critical services vis-a-vis other local governments? Next slide. Funding to HCPSS, again, and this really goes back to developing the budget, is to not set a floor in terms of MOE this year that creates a floor that can't be met next year. So just again, exercising caution in providing funding above MOE. Again, we have that reminder that if you build it, if you set that floor this year, that is the floor. So whatever number you put out there becomes next year's number. So we look at that 6.6 and say, okay, we can put the number up here, and now you got to live with it, and you can't go back. So just be careful in how far forward you go. All entities prioritizing needs and really just developing long-term plans based on, if, as a county, we're looking at a 3.3, 3.4% projection. Everybody should develop their long-term budgets with that number in mind. And then get some clarity, because that was one question that came up on Saturday when we were going through some things. What is that implementation unfunded mandate as far as the blueprint for Maryland's future? And, I looked to my friend Jen Mallow in terms of providing some clarity on that, because the slides we got from HCPSS from Dr. Martiranos shows 161 million gap. But if you look at the DLS study, it's saying that the county is we're already funding at a level that we should, and there should be no gap. And Jen, I don't know if you want to jump in here now before I continue on while this point is out there, or if that's something that just needs to go back to Dr. Martirano.
I'm trying to jump on here.
Hello, Jen.
So by the DLS study that you're referencing is, I assume, the projections of what MOE should be?
No,
Which
Sorry, Holly, do you want to bring that up?
that's not. There's the one called the local fiscal impact of blueprint implementation by DOS. I think Steve sent everybody over the weekend. And DOS, just like a school system, again, I think both the state and I think our school system are doing preliminary projection at this point. But on DOS own analysis, there are 3 different groups of counties. There are some school system there are projected to need more local funding beyond the historical trend. Some actually need very limited adjustment, and then some, including Howard County, based on DLS trend analysis, if we provide historical level of funding, which is close to like a 14-15 million increase a year, they believe with blueprint implementation, you don't need more, because they believe what the state funding increase based on blueprint is sufficient to cover the new implementation costs incurred by Blueprint. So, and that's Howard County is not alone. They listed several other counties in that group. So that was the report released in January. So that was a huge difference between the two. Again, both are very preliminary analysis from school versus DLS regarding what is the unfunded piece or the unfunded mandates to local funding for implementing Blueprint, because that's very significant. So our understanding is that both sides may need to sit down and talk and review all the details. I think the committee just tried to make a point that it's not very clear at this point. That's something that needs to further explore, because it has huge implications about what is going to be the additional burden to the county going forward.
So I can certainly speak to part of this. So the state and DLS believes that there are things like the pre-K expansion grants. And to date, we've only received a small share of pre-K expansion grants. And we have not, we have applied for and not been given pre-K expansion grants for some of our schools. And so for us to have not received that grant, that it remains for us an unfunded mandate as we move into implementing the pre-K up to the amount of 300% of the poverty line, compared to the 180 we have right now, as well as that population is even smaller. So one of the other things that isn't coming into consideration in the DLS study, to my knowledge, is when we are looking at estimating MOE for pre-K. Right now, the numbers are in arrears for the previous year. So they're only counting the number of students enrolled in full day pre-K right now, which is only at 15 of our schools, where when we're looking at the number of students that we actually have to serve to convert from half day to pre-K, that's another 25 plus classrooms. I believe it's 28 to be exact. So because those numbers will be undercounted because they only are putting full day pre-K into the maintenance of effort calculations. As well, the school system, because the county already funds us at levels above MOE, the calculations that DLS was coming up with, the funding stream is significantly limited for the school system. So I believe that, yes, there needs to be a meeting of the minds, but there's no way that we, at our current level of funding, can meet the mandates provided in the blueprint. Now, there is some consideration as from the state level about moving the blueprint timeline so that it spreads it out farther. But at the same time, we are still legally obliged to get our employees, our teachers, up to 60,000 by fiscal 27. That alone, at nearly the numbers of employees we have is, between 8,000 and 10,000. So, but to get our teachers, our classroom teachers, and to expand the number of classroom teachers with pre-K, with associated services, we still have to move in that direction, because that's the current law, regardless of the timeline expansion. So I understand the desire to be cautious, but and this recommendation, and at the same time, we are going to be woefully underfunded to meeting the needs of and the expectations of Blueprint, and we're going to have to catch up later on. So if we don't fund it aggressively now, when we can, we will be looking at a pretty big hole, as well as there is a funding cliff that we're experiencing. So prior to Blueprint 2.0 being passed, there were some grant funds that were issued by the state, and those are beginning to sunset. So when we look at funding, we do need to find additional funding streams.
Can I follow
I'm happy to take any questions you have, but
Yeah, I do. Thanks, Jen. And just so I understand it better, and I'm not sure that any of us do, and you probably already know. Under the blueprint, are the salary requirements under the blueprint for pre-K teachers the same as for elementary, middle, and high school teachers? And what are the certification requirements for pre-K teachers that the current elementary, middle, and high school teachers have to meet? Are there requirements now for pre-K for certification?
yes. Yes, so a pre-K teacher today must be a certified teacher, the same as an elementary teacher or middle, or like there are different certifications. So you can be certified for secondary or elementary or early childhood. And know that for every pre-K classroom, it's a 1-to-10 ratio mandated by the state. So 1 adult to every 10 students. That means that every classroom needs a teacher as well as a paraeducator and potentially additional staff like special education staff. So right now in our programs, we have the majority of our pre-K programs have a component that is for special education. So in many of our pre-K classrooms, you're looking at not just 2 staff members who need to be, 2 staff members, a teacher and a paraeducator, but you're looking at a special education teacher who again must be certified, the standard teacher as well as the paraeducator, and any potential additional assistance if a student is in, like, has multiple intensive needs and needs a one-on-one assistant. So for
Jen,
I think you're
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, it looks like Jen's connection dropped out. Holly, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, it looks like Jen's connection dropped out. So, why don't we go to the next slide? Hopefully, she can jump back in here because this is definitely an important conversation. So, next slide, please. And if Jen gets back in, we'll just go backwards here. So, other findings and recommendations, operating budget. I think we put this one in just about every recommendation document for the committee, is to explore the use of technology and other innovative means by which to do service delivery and plan for a certain transitions such as remote work. Jen, are you back with us?
can you hear me yet?
Yes. Okay. Yeah,
Okay.
we had moved to the next slide, but that was considering if you got back, we would go backwards. So go back. Holly,
Okay,
please.
what could you last hear?
Oh, wow.
It's about 2 minutes ago. 2 minutes ago, it's broke about 2 minutes ago.
Yeah, you started spinning out about 2 minutes ago.
Okay, so I'll try to shorten it and give you the bottom line up front. Every pre-K classroom needs a certified teacher, a paraeducator, and potentially a special education certified educator.
And every
So-
classroom is defined as 10 students?
No, every classroom will be defined as 20 students.
Okay.
So it's capped at 20, except in cases of multiple intensive needs, and then it is capped at 16. So if you have students with multiple disabilities, then it is a smaller classroom for delivery of instruction. But the bottom line is you need a certified teacher and that will be at that 60,000 level by fiscal 27. Any special education educator in the classroom will need to be at that 60,000. And then our para educators are closer to 25,000 in salary, but that's not a fully loaded cost. So fully loaded, it's probably closer to 32,000.
Sorry, I just got a text from Leonardo that he has to leave in a few minutes. So he has one point he want to make. Let's let him do that, and then we'll come back for the board budget. Yeah.
Leonardo?
Thanks, Holly. Yeah, thanks, Holly. And again, I'll be quick, but it just gets to the third, I guess the second bullet under revenue options, and that's just the management of the overall tax burden and maintaining regional competitiveness. And I think this is something that certainly we shouldn't overlook in terms of whether that's various policies that are implemented or even being under consideration as we think about economic development, as we think about growing the commercial tax digest and so forth. There have been things introduced, whether that's locally or even statewide, that potentially would continue to make things, make doing business in Howard County more expensive and or at least hinder us from a competitiveness standpoint. And I think there are times where we may talk about, as an example, certain fees, for instance, being less than neighboring counties, and thus we should, raise those fees to be more competitive or to be more in line. But at the same time, I think we should also think in some respects a little bit differently, in that if those fees, as an example, are less, then that's giving us a competitive advantage. Yes, there may be more revenue to be generated if we raise them, but again, I think it's just a different way of thinking that, as we consider various fees as an example. The last thing is this other bullet about updating the general plan. This is also something that's going to be huge, that's going to tie into just future development and where it takes place and how it takes place. So I think that can't be understated as well, particularly as we look at certain areas as growth areas, in light of the fact that, as we've heard, from DPZ, that it's not like we're just sitting on acres and acres of developable land and so forth. So those were just two things I really wanted us to just kind of reiterate prior to having to leave.
Thank you, Leonardo.
Thank you, Leonardo.
Yeah, and sorry, I think, Jen, do you have any other things to add on that? Thank you for the information, by the way.
I'm happy to take any additional questions if people have them.
Right.
I'm not sure what additional information, I don't know where I cut away, so I don't know what still needs explained.
Yeah, I also.
Well, I guess the last question was with Todd. Did you have any follow-up to your question?
No, that's good enough for now. It was very helpful.
Okay. Does anybody else have anything for Jen here? Okay. And one thing, Jen, just so you know, one thing we talked about as far as just process improvement going forward is to, Holly talked about this, for next year is to, format this state so that there's much more time for discussion in terms of ACPSS. I mean, if you're looking at something that is, north of 60% of the budget, and obviously the county puts such an importance on education, I don't think any of us felt like they're, obviously Dr. Martirano had to go, but instead of saying, okay, ACPSS has 30 minutes and then we're just going to move on to the next one, we're going to try to figure out, it might be one of the days that is dedicated to just talking about it, because as you well know, this blueprint's not going away, and there clearly are some questions and clarity that is needed between, you've got the blueprint itself, you've got this DLS report, you've got what, you guys who are on the ground with this thing are discovering as far as what the classroom looks like. I think with that blueprint, it probably was a discussion worth having if there was no blueprint, but I think that that is a bigger discussion. Hopefully, for this year, the county executive will have a deeper dive with you all as far as the superintendent and the board. But I think we all agree that we need to have a deeper discussion as we're developing this committee report. So just so you know, and you can certainly take that back to your colleagues and to Dr. M. So
I'll jump in for one second. I'm not sure it really fits in, and I don't want to dive into it in any depth at all this morning, but what concerns me greatly from a business perspective is how this impacts private sector daycare. And does private sector daycare survive if the standard is now set at $60,000 salaries for private sector daycare providers for 3 and 4-year-olds? And I don't need to go into it now. It's just something that does concern me greatly. And what are the implications for not just during the school year daycare, but when school is out and when school is off in the summer, and how that daycare survives when it now has to compete with salary levels that are completely unsustainable for the private sector in daycare. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, I would love to briefly address that. And in terms, so there's 2 components. There's daycare for before pre-K, and then there's kind of before and after care as well. But in terms of the pre-K component, we are required to have community partners. And those will be, we're supposed to get up to the amount of 50% community partners providing this pre-K care. And the state will provide funding for that. However, the number of community partners right now that are willing
I think there's some transmission issue again.
Yeah. Okay, so let's press on, and we'll see if we get Jen back one more time, and if we can maybe come back to that discussion as a wrap up point. So go back one slide, Holly. All right, so we talked about exploring use of technology, the revenue option. I think Leonardo covered that in his comments. Larry, I don't know if you want to add anything to that as far as basically it's a balance between what we recommend, balancing recommended new funding mechanisms versus competitiveness.
Larry had to leave for board meeting, so he left about like 10 minutes ago.
Okay. Well, then we'll capture that later. But I think I'm assuming he would have reflected what Leonardo just said as far as keeping, maintain competitiveness.
Yeah, actually, he made a quick text, which is very similar to actually Leonardo already mentioned that about.
Okay.
About try to make sure that maintain the competitiveness there. That's including policy and any legislation tools that try to ensure keep the competitive or attractiveness of the county to business, to existing and new business there.
Okay. All right. So let's go to the next slide then, and I'm going to try to get to these quickly because obviously we can revisit these when we get to the final recommendations. So I want to give some time for discussion here. So. CIP, again, we talked about this. Increase in designated funding should be used to lower debt authorization. We saw what that number was, versus revenue. So, whatever we could do to accelerate that downward pressure, getting us below that 10% number, as far as debt service is a good thing. Balance between maintenance of existing infrastructure and new projects. For years we talked about how short we were in various things, road resurfacing projects, et cetera. So, maintaining that balance. And then, we talked about this, this point was also made earlier, working with agencies and entities to reduce requested balance needs. But that really applies across the board. Next slide. And that is it. So I'm going to throw it out to the room here. Does anybody have any questions, concerns, comments on the considerations, the other considerations we put out there, or does anybody have something new that needs to be discussed and possibly included in the report?
Steve, are we voting on these considerations as to how they're rolled into the report?
No, these are not individual items that we vote on. They will obviously be included in the, once we do the draft report, they'll be included in that report for final vote on the entirety of the report. But the only items that we actually take a vote on are the three that we already have.
Can I raise a question? I think we should at least reach consensus that we believe these should be included, because I don't think we should get to the last day of the report and start debating whether to take one out or something. I think we should have a sense of, does everybody feel comfortable with these points being made in the additional pieces, and if there's anything else they think to go. It's not a formal vote, but I think we need to be going forward that this is the will of the committee. This is consistent with what the committee believes.
Well, that's why I opened the floor up to discussion, so that if anybody has any problem, they can say it now before we even start writing the draft report. So does anybody have any comments, questions, concerns about the ones we put on the table, or any new ones? Or any new ones that you want to propose be included in the report? Excuse me. Okay, I'm not hearing anything on the other considerations. Jen is back on phone. Jen, can you hear us?
I can.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks for continuing to fight the good fight with technology. Okay, so did anybody have anything else? I know we're having a really good conversation. Jen, you were making a point about pre-K, to Todd's question about pre-K versus daycare.
Right. So the state expects us to have up to 50% of our partners be community partners. So the state will provide funding, but the amount of community partner funding is not equal to the amount of cost to provide the services. So in 2018, the amount of reimbursement was in the 10,500 range, where the amount of service cost per student was closer to 14,000. So we've had a difficult time getting community partners, and I suspect that's something that's going to have to change and perhaps be indexed to the county cost of living at the state level, because the cost of providing daycare in Harford County is different than Howard County. So it will fundamentally alter the role of private daycare and private provision of pre-K programs. But I think the industry will, part of it will change that industry. I don't know that it will decimate the industry, but yes, there is going to be a big gap between the between the amounts that some daycares are currently paid. But also remember that daycare and pre-K are not necessarily the same.
Gotcha. Todd, I believe that was your question. I don't know if you had a follow-up or to that point that Jen just made.
No, I'm good for now. It's something I want to look at going forward, but I'm not even sure it's relevant to the committee. So thank you.
Sure, but it's an important point to throw out. So, so that pretty much is it for just going through the framework here. Jen, we had just talked about if we went through all the other report considerations, and I just threw it out to the floor. If anybody had any comments on the considerations we put out there, or if they wanted to recommend new items to include in the report considerations section. So Josh, I see you jumping in here.
No, I was just going to mention, we've talked about it before, and that's the idea of having kind of like a year-long commission or committee that we could really delve into the issues around BOE and other things that are really compressed now. So we've made that recommendation before to, whether it's quarterly meetings or just meetings when a big spending issue reaches the county, so that we can have more of an ongoing consultation and develop more expertise. So I'm putting that back out there again.
Yeah, and Josh, thanks for putting that out there. And I would agree, because I know that one thing that at least I think we were useful in was, when the idea about the new courthouse came up, and there was discussion about, how to fund it, and that the whole P3 concept came up. I thought that was a great conversation that we were able to have and analyze and basically provide a recommendation. That was not something that's part of the normal course of business. We found a way to fit it into our committee process, and I thought that was a great thing. So, I don't know, Holly, if you can just kind of jot that down, so we can discuss, including that in considerations for when we start writing up the draft report. The other thing that I think is of value is, if say we met in the fall, we could see the actuals for fiscal year 22 and see how that turned out, so that we're not, we're not kind of just hanging out there, as we're looking at next year. There's kind of a trailer there. So I think there's a lot of good information that could come out and be discussed in recommendations. So, yeah, let's keep that in mind, and how we may write that into this other considerations section. So thanks, Josh. Anybody else have anything
Yes.
to throw out there?
Well, in our past, we've made recommendations on the community education, and I would like us to continue that process of reaching out into the community and explaining what the spending affordability report is about, and encouraging people to read it. Thank you.
Yeah,
I'll just say I support both what Josh said and what Barbara said. Those are things that need repeating, because I think they're essential to the message.
Yeah, and I think that was a good initiative started, as far as I'll call it the public relations campaign that Steve SAAC started up. Because I remember I was in a couple of conversations, and I do think they were beneficial, as far as talking to various organizations, civic groups, etc. It's time well spent, I believe, because I think that I wasn't around last year, but or the year before, but I just saw some of the fallout, and I'll just leave it at that. And I think that there was a lot of other messages put out there that were not rooted in reality; they were rooted more in personal opinion. And I think that if, as a group, some of us, if not as many of us as possible, get out there and just tell the story and provide the level of context. I know when we talked about the context for the report. Josh really laid it out well, and I remember saying, "Hey, let's capture that somehow," because I think he did a really good job of setting the stage. I'm glad we were able to incorporate that into this framework. So, yeah, agree.
This is Joan Dreesen.
Yes,
I would just like to reiterate that, and even give a slightly different perspective, which is this members of this committee have several times had a conversation with the nonprofits. And it not only gave them some reality about the fiscal situation, but it also allowed them to talk with this committee about some of the issues that they're confronting, so that those can be balanced. So I think it's extremely productive. And I do think that, particularly in the area of education, that's something that we need to continue to do, is to have the discussion about how all these pieces fit together. So I absolutely think that the outreach is incredibly important. So, and I thank this committee for coming to ACS this year.
Well,
So
Joe, what I will tell you is, and I believe it was correct. I'm sorry if I'm not giving proper credit, but I believe it was Barb and even Ellen who had some really good points on how this county how we deliver services, some of those, social services, et cetera, not, some of our non-profits versus government, and where Howard County's government stands versus other counties, and how much we rely on nonprofits to deliver certain services. And I'm sure that came out of conversations with you all. So I think we thank you for that input, because some of the stuff that they were talking about on Saturday, I did not realize what other counties did versus what Howard does, or to be quite blunt, doesn't do in terms of funding for some of those services that are delivered by nonprofits that you wouldn't think they do that.
Yeah, and I so appreciate that input. I really do. And, and I appreciated that being included in the other considerations, because we're in a pretty dire state right now in our ability to hire people in the nonprofit sector. And it's a real concern. And I'm hoping that we can have more of a conversation with county government officials about that as they develop the budget. So, but thank you all for that. It's truly appreciated.
Yeah, so I think the outreach I think we've all hit that point pretty well as far as outreach. I think it's pretty clear, and Jen, I don't know if you're still out there, but it sounds like a conversation with the board or the superintendent or both would not be a bad idea, because there are clearly some things out there, some things that need to be understood by us, by Mr. Hendrickson, thank you. I got a text that he had to leave, but
yeah, I think we need to wrap this up, because we're going to lose people, and we've kind of covered the salient points.
Okay. Thank you, Barb. It is 8:42. So does anybody else have anything? I think we all are in agreement on the point about outreach, and let's definitely put that into the report.
Yeah, we'll definitely add that, the 2 points that just made.
Okay. Holly, I think I'm done with my part, so I'll turn it back over to you to wrap up. And
thank you. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, everybody,
thank you very much for chairing the discussion on that.
Sure.
This is really great. I just want to say that, well, I want to send the folks that are helping draft the report itself. They kind of, the committee already is extra time, and folks there are taking extra time to help with the report. I also want to see anybody else there have any comments to make before I wrap it up. And we next week, by the way, we'll bring back the whole to the full committee again, the preliminary draft for vote and for the discussion. But before we close, just want to ask anybody else have points to make. Okay. All right. Just thank you all very much again for great discussion. I really appreciate it. We really appreciate that. I'll hopefully see you next week.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks all.